A very good afternoon to you, viewers and also listeners on Gold FM. Welcome to Speak Your Mind with Pedeli Rohtibuna. And I'm joined this afternoon by the chairman of MIDA, whom we've, no stranger to us at FBC. Welcome to the show, Mr. Ashwin Raj.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Pedeli, and good afternoon, Fiji.
Well, now, elections done and dusted, but of course the coverage of media has been the topic of many discussions, even leading up to the campaign. But first of all, I'm going to ask you, how did the elections and how did the coverage of the elections progress, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. I think, the media played a fundamental role, in the lead up to elections. And of course, will no doubt play a critical role in the post-election itinerary. Free and fair coverage, of the elections by the media in ensuring that, the elections was conducted in a transparent manner was extremely critical in restoring confidence and credibility. So in that sense, the media played a fundamental role. Let's start with the positives. The first thing to note is that there were 450 media personnel, here present covering a very historic moment. And it's a very significant thing for several reasons. I mean, first, we have to recognize the fundamental shift in our political landscape. From 2006, where there was a lot of talk about the suppression of media freedom, to 2014, where the spaces had opened up, a lot more sort of journalists seen around freely doing their work. The talkback shows, the live discussions, the interviews with political parties. I mean, that to me is all very positive sign that the spaces are opening up.
And the internet.
Absolutely. The social media was a buzz with all kinds of engagement. And I certainly hope we will talk about the social media in some segment and the kind of role that the social media has played. So as a positive sign, the presence of 450 local plus international media, including freelance journalists, was a very, very positive sign. The other positive thing was, the strict adherence to the requirements of the blackout period.
That's right. Yeah.
That worked out remarkably well. And everybody's commitment to, ensuring that this is about the capacity of Fijians to be able to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
Now, we were closely monitored by the international media, who were also present now, who also were very critical, and I'd have to say during the campaigns for political parties, very critical of MIDA, but also of that particular 48-hour media blackout. Let's talk about that. And this is the first time it's being done in Fiji. Now, how did that come about and how was it received?
Initially there was a lot of paranoia about, how one is going to possibly manage something like this. Complete blackout period. I just want to reinforce again, for the members of the public, that the blackout period really was about, ensuring that, there was no advocacy, political advocacy, using the mainstream media, so that our voters could independently, cast their vote without any due influence.
So initially it was meant for the political parties and leaders?
Meant for the political parties, but also, the media. Because the media is that important conduit between the multitude of political actors and the public at large. And so, in a sense, I mean, for us, that was the focus. Our instructions were very clear in terms of our own interpretation of the law, that one would have to delineate the reporting of the administrative elements of the elections from the political nature of these reports that had the effect of either inciting, or aiding and abetting the political agenda of a particular, political actor or actors or parties. So that was the fundamental delineation. Also, that anything that came from the Supervisor of Elections, Fiji Elections Office, the Multinational Observer Group, or the Electoral Commission was permissible. So in a sense, what we wanted to do was to ensure that, look, nobody has this apprehension that there's complete blackout and something dodgy is going on. Right. For us, full transparency was important, which is why We had regular updates with the media.
Uh-huh.
The supervisor of elections, had his press conferences and regularly updated the media and the country about what was going on. We had a media center, right across the counting center, so where the media sort of convened. So in a sense, that was the intent. To ensure that while the blackout period is observed, so that our ordinary citizens can cast their vote without any due influence, while ensuring that the process was transparent, that the public was always informed. So we had decided, look, regular updates every 2 hours, so on and so forth. Let's talk about the reception of it, which is really your question. Journalists Without Borders kicked up a fuss and have said that, and this was reiterated by Amnesty International as well, that this is again an indictment of the suppression of media freedom and freedom of expression and all of that. I want to sort of make it absolutely clear that against these lofty ideals, the members of the public came out in numbers, and I did the polling rounds, and they said to me, thank God for the 48-hour period. We all needed that break, and after all the bickering, all the political bickering, using the media, mutual accusations and all the nastiness, they needed some peace and quiet and some reprieve to be able to just independently cast their vote. So members of the public were thankful. And to me, what ordinary Fijians think is important. And, even some members of political party, for instance, one of my friends from Sadelpa, communications person, she came up to me and she said, Ashwin, thank God for the 48-hour period. We're all so tired. So, in a sense, I'm saying that against all these lofty ideals, Pedeli, one has to think about the impact it's having on our citizens. Now, if the 48-hour period was used to absolutely squash the media altogether, I'd say, okay, there's some merit in that argument. But for people who are absolutely cut off from this place, have not entered our protocols, have made no effort to inquire exactly what the intent is, what this actually means, and running around and making a series of knowing pronouncements about the state of unfreedom, well, I've got an exception to them.
Now, do you not think that it still sets a dangerous precedent for having this sort of restriction?
Dangerous for whom? Let's seriously, analyze what happened in the lead up to elections. If you take the social media, for instance, the tone of, political discourse was absolutely disparaging. The nasty things people said about our politicians, the terrible things that were said about anybody who was working with the state, the death threats, the vulgarity of it all, which could not possibly be seen as an alibi to democratic discourse. So in a sense, for me, and I want to make it absolutely clear, my commitment and our commitment is to Fijians. It's not to please the international media. This is not about populism. This is not about popularity contest. This is about ensuring that there is safety, security, harmony in our country, and there is cohesion.
All right, on that note, we'll take a short break right here on Speak Your Mind on Gold FM. Welcome back to Gold FM Speak Your Mind. We're speaking with the chairman of MIDA, Mr. Ashwin Rajan. If you do have questions, feel free to call in 3220-906 and 3220-907, or you can also send us an email at goldfm@mbc.com.fj. Easier still, you can text in to 825, but put the letter G before your text. Now, just before we headed to the break, we touched on the social media. Now, the 48-hour media blackout, or the blackout period, also applied to the to the internet, the social media network. How difficult and what was within the scope of that?
Unfortunately, the 48-hour period, precludes the social media, only because it's not within the conditions of possibility for us to be able to police the social media, which is why you would have recalled, I made a press statement about, the fact that, one has to appeal to the public sense of reason and civic responsibility, given the number of statements that were being made. And the shocking thing is, Padeli, and I want to really talk about this, is the role of diasporic groups overseas in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere, in the US, who had, certain views about who should rule Fiji. They sadly, some of these people, not all, so I'm not trying to metonymize, some of them have tried to really incite people here. And they're calling for bloodshed. Numerous statements were being made about our military. People were questioning the integrity of the electoral process, and so on and so forth. And so I had to, and the Islamophobia, given the unfortunate situation with our soldiers, and it was quickly descending into an anti-Muslim sentiment. And that really worried me, because to me, anybody who tries to incite, political violence, communal hatred, so on and so forth, which is going to result in fragmentation and attrition, it is my job to intervene. And I don't have to wait for a formal complaint. As the chairman of MIDA, you need to sort of read actively, voraciously, keep an eye on the media, be proactive. And that's exactly what I did. And I was quite saddened by the fact that some people who were outside the country were inciting our ordinary citizens. But you know what? The wonderful thing was that people came out in numbers. I had phone calls, coming from ordinary members of the public saying, hey, Mr. Raj, we're seeing a poster, in so-and-so place, and shouldn't that be out? Or, we're seeing, this kind of discussion in the social media. What are you doing about it? And so, I kind of felt, this is wonderful. The public is taking us seriously. And the fact that the public is, taking the media seriously and the authority seriously, made me accountable to them. So I was working around the clock. I was up for the 48 hours blackout period, literally vetting all the reports. And of course, the day of the elections, and the supervisor of elections, myself, and a whole bunch of journalists. I mean, we were there at the media center. And I recall how we left the room, the next morning at 7:30 a.m. without blinking or yawning. So we were seriously working.
Some of us still
absolutely,
blinking.
Absolutely.
But what everyone would like to know at this point is what was done to those who violated these restrictions.
One thing we did was we held a joint press conference between MIDA and the FEO, setting out the guidelines, around reporting, on elections in the 48-hour blackout period and on the day of the elections. So that was the first thing, and we laid out what was permissible and the kind of penal liabilities that would kick in the event of an infraction. Now, what I did was I kept an eye on all the coverage, and the media were very proactive. They'd quickly run to me because I was sitting in the media center and saying, sure, Mr. Raj, we're writing a report on this, and what do you think? I mean, can this go? In terms of the provisions of the decree, and I'd quickly vet. And so we moved very quickly, because the other pressure on me was, of course, to not sit on these reports. The timeliness of these reports and as they went out to the public was important. So I didn't have the time to just sit and really mull. You had to act with that kind of precision. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The other thing I did was, I casted my vote very early. And I did the rounds of the polling station, talking to the police, talking to the media that there's a requirement. You have to be away from the polling station, at this particular distance. So I literally did that at every polling station, not to disrupt our voters from casting their votes. Stop taking photographs as they cast their vote or interview them,
Did you feel that there was some happening somewhere?
It's almost impossible. I'd have to be God to have absolute control over these things. I don't have that kind of intuition to the transcendental. But, I have to say for the large part, because I spoke to the police a lot, and I thank the police and the military for the part they actually played, people were enforcing the rules, and so that was wonderful. And the members of the public were wonderful. I mean, they were out there in numbers doing their thing. And the local media, I have to express my appreciation for the local media, because the media landscape is so deeply politicized. In the sense that there is a perception that one media is absolutely obsequious and genuflective towards the government, and the other one is anti-government. And my job is really to sort of kind of work with the media to sort of fight those perceptions, try to be balanced and fair and accurate. And the public deserve better from the media. So, in a sense, when you're dealing with a highly fragmented sort of kind of media landscape, and where media freedom was so deeply politicized. I mean, the issue of media freedom in campaign has to be unprecedented. I mean, ever since I've taken on the position of MIDA chairman, there's been so much controversy on a number of issues. My intervention on the issue of hate speech, for instance. Also, around a ton of things like advertising and decency. On opening up the spaces so that members of the public are able to get their letters to the editors published or opinion pieces published. I've had to work around the clock on a number of these things to restore the confidence that public will have in the media. And so I've had to appeal to them. We've had editors roundtable, regular meetings to see what works and what doesn't work. But no man is an island. You can't do this alone.
Very true. We'll come back to that right after this short break on Speak Your Mind. And feel free also, if you do have a question, well, do jump in 3220906 and 3220907 or flick in an email at goldfm@fbc.com.fj.
Bob.
Welcome back to Speak Your Mind, and with me, the chairman of MIDA. We're talking about coverage of the 2014 Fiji elections. Just before the break, we spoke a little about the type or the role that MIDA had to play prior to elections in terms of restoring the trust and also just the confidence that the public had for our local media, especially in this climate. Now, how do you feel that we've fared as media organizations and throughout this period?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I have to say is that the media has had to operate within a complexity of constraints, just like MIDA, in the sense that, we've had a highly tense political environment where people had taken sides, and which is why I gave the press conference about declaring one's political disposition, ideological proclivities, if you have any, so that everybody's in the clear. I had asked for a full disclosure of in-house editorial policy. At least one newspaper said no. And so it's something to think about because, for me, the disclosure of in-house editorial policy is important because, the public has the right to know why some of their letters don't get published, or get published to the exclusion of others. Why some of the opinion pieces don't make it to the press. I mean, what are the in-house editorial policies? What are the regulations that guide how the media publishes stuff? What is aired? What is not aired? So I was doing that in the interest of transparency. Of course, that was very easily politicized by some by saying that this is the guy who's trying to tighten the noose on the media. Nothing like that. It's about transparency. So in a sense, when in an atmosphere where people had taken sides, I think the media did relatively well. Like I said, I'm just moved by their tenacity of spirit. They've seen a lot in this country. The media industry's seen a lot in this country. 2 coups. Three coups. Three coups. I'm suffering from social amnesia now. This is what happens when you don't sleep much. 3 coups, lots of pressure. They've done remarkably well. Whatever the media did slip, I mean, I've had to work with them, and the retraction and the kind of self-reflexivity they exercised was absolutely refreshing. There was so much solidarity. Of course, some of them were emotionally leaking, and some of the reports were unacceptable. And I've spoken to them. I've said that it's not right to incriminate, politicians, to make personal statements about, individuals, because it's not. You don't carry yourself with that. You have to conduct yourself with the kind of decorum that is expected of you. See, people look up to the media. So in that sense, how you conduct yourself, the kind of reports you write, to me is extremely important. So the first thing that I'd asked for was the disclosure of in-house editorial policy. Remember, the other thing that I'd asked for was an independent media monitoring unit. And everybody jumped on my back saying, oh, this is about MIDA policing again. Yet in the lead up to elections, the same politicians were crying foul and saying, look, there's more access for this particular political party and little access. And I said, look, guys, that is exactly why I had said we have an independent media monitoring unit that is going to give us an independent analysis of how much airtime or space given to respective political parties to ensure that everybody had equal access. But I kept pushing for that message anyway, because I thought, this is important to keep reminding the media, please treat everybody equally. The other thing was, the consistency of questions posed to political parties. I mean, I wanted everybody to be interrogated with the same set of criteria. Of course, there'll be peculiar questions that are very specifically directed to a certain actor or political entity because of who they are and what they represent and all of that. But you got to be consistent and you got to be fair to all of them. And also realize the fact that they're human beings at the end of the day, and give them the kind of dignity they deserve. I remember when I went to the media freedom panel, there was this woman, I mean, she was like a Rottweiler under the moonlight. She said, you bald head, I hate you, this and that. And I kept my cool and I thought, look, you don't respond to people who are emotionally leaking. You want to be able to exercise reason. Of course, within a day, an announcement is made that she's got an official appointment with one political party. So you begin to wonder, where's objectivity in all of this as people are trying to criticize media freedom or the lack of it. And the politicization of the media was very apparent to me. The other thing was, if you look at political parties, they kept saying, there is no media freedom in this country. Right. We want to get rid of the media decree. We will get rid of MIDA. Now, the same people have written to me several times complaining about the conduct of the media. So the question I have for everybody, the public and these politicians, is, can you afford to have full-fledged freedom without responsibility? Given the series of complaints lodged with MIDA, it's a very strong testament of the fact that some regulation of the media is necessary within the boundaries of reason.
Well, fair enough. But let's jump back to the coverage during elections.
Mm-hmm.
We also had a fair bit of international media reporting, and there was a statement that you made in today's Fiji Sun, some concerns to the way that it was covered. Now, the particular media organization that lacked the historical knowledge of Fiji's elections. Now, what have you got to say about that
look, one? I mean, there's several things. I mean, first was my concern with Radio New Zealand. Remember, the politicians, the leaders of the other political parties had alleged that, there was some fraudulent practice in this election. Yeah. And the media quickly ran to report that. And, I mean, I was, and I saw it on radio, the website for Radio New Zealand. And, I thought to myself, and TV3, and I thought to myself, have they paused for a second to ask the supervisor of the elections or the Electoral Commission really what the facts are? I mean, corroborate some of these claims, but they went ahead to sensationalize. And, I mean, to me, the real concern was how our media is so attracted to crisis, right? So the first thing was, remember, on the day of the elections, our Prime Minister had gone to cast his vote. And here's a New Zealand journalist asking, can you promise us, Prime Minister, that there will not be another coup? I'm like, hello, we've just casted our vote and people are still voting. Why don't you just give us a break? So for me, the fetish that the media has with crisis and keeping us in a perpetual state of crisis was something that came out very clearly. The second thing was, basic facts, like Al Jazeera, for instance, reported that Indo-Fijians will be voting for the first time. I mean, given the fact that, franchise was extended to, Indo-Fijians in the 1920s, I was glad that they certainly came, 100 years later, but they're on the page. The other thing was, they talked about the 2000 coup, that the 2000 coup was perpetrated by indigenous Fijians against a small, rich Indo-Fijian minority. Not every Indo-Fijian is rich, and not every indigenous Fijian, endorsed the coup. So, they need to get the facts right.
Like you will now have to take another short break. Unfortunately, time is catching up with us real fast here on Speak Your Mind. Welcome back to Gold FM Speak Your Mind, and we're talking about the coverage of, the Fiji elections 2014 and the role that the media play. And with us is the chairman of the Media Industry Development Authority, Mr. Ashwin Raj. Now, Mr. Raj, we were just talking about, the role of international media and, unfortunately, some of the reports that became a bit too colorful.
Yeah.
And now, how does MIDA react after that? Now, what happens?
Yeah. We've tried to be proactive. For instance, I called Radio New Zealand, and I have to say, to their credit, they immediately retracted. They got the official views of the Electoral Commission. And because I talked to them about the glaring lack of, accuracy, balance, and fairness in that report, Al Jazeera called me back. And they said to me, the retraction on, the statement about Indo-Fijians voting for the first time will take 3 weeks. And I thought, to me, do get the facts right. And they said, look, we've been here only 3 days. And I said, look, but one can actually read about the country. This is the statement I made about parachute journalism. You don't fly into a country 5 minutes and start making statements. Remember what happened with the journalism lecturers and the statements they're making, which was extremely anachronistic. And so, I'm saying by all means be critical of what's happening in the country. Nobody's stopping you from that. But get your facts right.
That is very true. Now, again, with these reports, the social media also plays another important role, picking up these reports and the damage that also makes to the whole process of the elections. Yeah. Now, what kind of what steps is there for MIDA in terms of not having this repeated?
I want to go on a campaign talking to members of the public about exercising reason in the social media. There are two things that we need to think through. If you look at liberalism, and if you look at liberalism's, pet children, one is the unchecked euphoria around youth and young people, and the other is the media, right? And the social media in particular. And they say, look, you got to be savvy, and you got to, use the social media to appeal to young people, blah, blah. I think we need to have a sober assessment of all of that. Because if you look at the engagement of some of the young people, not all, some of the young people in the social media, and the kind of reckless, disparaging, sort of racist, sexist, statements they're actually making, you got to pause and reflect and say, are these the kind of young people you're actually saying are the future of this nation?
That's right. Is this what you want to encourage?
Yeah. And the other thing was the role of social media, because a lot of people kept saying, look, because media freedom is so repressed in this country, there's no space opening up, we've taken to the social media. But just see what the hell people are saying in the social media. And to me, that was a very scary thing. That to me is an abuse of that space, because really, if you look at, the radical opportunity that social media presents for everybody to be able to advance, sort of critical thinking, to, create a new wave of democratization, ours would be a history of missed opportunity, because we decided to abuse, we decided to personalize, we decided to incriminate and vilify. And, kudos to some people who got in there and said, hey guys, stop this thing, because this is shameful, and you got to reflect, and you got to be constructive. And so in a sense, we need to think about it. And I appeal to our young people in particular, because, they are the largest, sort of demographic that use the social media to please exercise reason. See, democracy, the core thing about democracy is not dissent. See, people think that it's to dissent all the time. It's about being able to use reason. You see, screaming and threatening other people and all of that, that's not, your democratic reflex. I mean, it's just antiques, I mean, you really have to be able to exercise reason across differences. And that's what we have yet to see.
What do you think are a more practical approach for us as organizations, media organizations, in trying to curb this, in trying to not encourage this, apart from setting out campaigns? Is there should be introduced in our education system, perhaps?
I mean, absolutely. When we go to civic education and we think about civic education, I think, if you look at the social science curriculum, when we think about civic education, you should start cultivating the habits of democracy there. What does it mean to be critical within the bounds of reason? What does it mean to defame somebody? What does it mean to use the media responsibly? What are the ethos of deliberative democracy? A ton of these things need to sort of kind of, be inculcated and embedded into the curriculum. Because you see, I mean, the other thing is that, people need to be not only taught the protocols of electoral democracy, but what happens in the post-elections landscape. For instance, for me, the big thing would be, lots of training, because we are also a development authority, with the media on reporting the parliament and reporting the parliament responsibly.
That is going to be
That
our
is
next
going
step.
to, the big thing. The public would like to know what's happening in parliament. What are these guys saying? And, you got to have a fully trained media that can report on these developments responsibly.
On that note, we'll take another break here on Speak Your Mind on Gold FM. You're back on Speak Your Mind on Gold FM with Pedro Rotivuna. And of course, feel free to also send in your comments after the show if you'd like, to our guest in studio, the chairman of the Media Industry Development Authority of Fiji, Mr. Ashwin Raj. Now, Mr. Raj, it's gotten very interesting. We've gotten to the crux of civic education, how important it is, especially for our young Fijians. Now, where to from now for MIDA, and what role does MIDA now play in the new Fiji?
Sure. I think that's a very appropriate question, and we need to take stock of it. The first thing I want to talk about is the Constitution. I'm very proud of our Constitution. It's got a very robust Bill of Rights. If you look at the Bill of Rights of our Constitution, it's a very, very sort of kind of forward-looking document, in the sense that not only does it talk about freedom of expression, but it also talks about the freedom of the press. And usually, you'd think that freedom of expression encapsulates freedom of the press. Here we explicitly talk about a free press. So that's very important for everybody to realize. But then 17H very, very specifically talks about regulating the media. So the key is that delicate dance between freedom of expression and of the press and responsibility. And I think MIDA will play a critical role in that aspect. As to the decree, that is for the politicians to debate. In Parliament, I've always said that my job is to educate and advocate. And, I'm a firm believer that hefty fines and imprisonment terms, seen as deterrents, will not achieve much. What we need to see is a change in mindset. And that's what we need to do. You need organic intellectuals around who will try and sort of, encourage people to productively use the media, to begin to appeal to these authorities, because they're there for a reason. It was very easy for people to ignore the authority, pre-elections, because people were caught in that tired debate about legitimacy and legality. That all is changing. And I'd like to think that MIDA is here to stay. So, I mean, for the politicians who are going around sort of, because it's one of those liberalism's sacred cows, to say we'll get rid of all of these things, and media freedom, unregulated sort of media freedom, will now have to take stock of the fact that MIDA is here to stay. We are talking about a responsible media, but a free media. And I'm going to, persevere with that. If I'm around, I don't want to presume that I will continue as the chairman. That's the call of the government, and I will respect that. But at the same time, if I'm around, I want to push for that. On the one hand, a free and a responsible media. On the other hand, opening up the space so that the public can responsibly engage with the media.
Right. Well, let's look at MIDA also with well the well you had Mata Yokola who had to resign from MIDA to stand in the elections. Are you looking at expanding? Well, as of now, as far as we know, it's the chairman of MIDA, and you've got quite a bit of responsibility.
Yeah.
Are you going to be having? Well, will you set up a more perhaps an office or?
Oh, absolutely. Look, our office is in Domain, and we'll be moving there. The reason why I was based at Suvavo was so that people could have access to me, because given the fact that we had lots of international journalists around. But no, we will be appointing a substantive director. We'll have a full board. That keeps all of us accountable, and of course the chairman. And also, we have got several things lined up in terms of the training of the media on the parliament, some more training on the constitution and the Bill of Rights. We did that in the beginning, but all the more reason we have media's guide to elections that we had in a draft form that our media had a part in. But now we need to sort of formalize all of those things. We want to go to schools and really, really start working with schools on educating our young people about how to use the media responsibly. And one of the things that MIDA will do is take some of the media personalities to the schools, because we want to work hand in hand. And also, this is also about personalities and all of that, huh? And some people, they're very attracted to certain idiosyncrasies, and I want to be able to productively use that, as good models. So we'll be doing that. I mean, I am looking forward to collaborating with the international community, the UN and others, to see where we can work with each other, given the limited resources we have, to advance our work. But we definitely have a full-on work plan, and I certainly hope to sort of materialize a lot of this. And I'm also looking forward to the goodwill of our public, which, we have a huge reserve of.
Oh. Well, I'm going to ask you straight out, coverage of the elections. How do you see Fiji's media's performance now compared to the previous years and looking forward?
I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic only because this is a remarkable feat for all of them to come out, because, people talked about how our media is very emasculated, bruised, all of that. I mean, yeah, fine, that's good for political propaganda. But the reality is that, they are a resilient group. They came out in numbers, did their job. I've been up for, 48 hours plus the day of the election, the day after, and the media was with me. So, one has to admire, like I said, the intestinal fortitude, the tenacity of the spirit. But I'm also hoping that, they will work with us, because we have a long way to go. It's not like there's a certain prescription and you did that and then the media is just all fine and perfect. This will require constant self-reflexivity, because you've got new journalists coming in, day out. I also hope that academic institutions that are churning out journalists, work very closely with the authority as well, in ensuring that, we're all on the same page.
Is there any at this time? How is the connection between MIDA and these, the institutions?
Well, we are working very well with FNU, and there's several programs and all of that, and I certainly hope that the same will happen with USP. But, the wonderful thing is that we have an internship program. So I want to get a lot of these young sort of kind of journalism students to come and work with us. And I also want people sort of with, legal background to come and work with us too. Because, the fascinating thing about MIDA is that, it's about the intersectionality between law and society.
Mr. Raj, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sadly, time has caught up with us once again. And thank you again for joining us on Speak Your Mind. Be sure to tune in again next week at the same time, same place.